Trade fears and slowing economic growth topped the agenda at the G20 summit in Japan over the weekend. Here is what some top global finance chiefs told Bloomberg about how this recent agreement between the US and Mexico affects the overall trade picture.
We're hopeful that we can make progress, but right now we don't really have a path, and this entire issue between the United States and China is something that we hope will help to move forward.
Very plus, yeah, very, and we do hope this is going to be also happen with the U.S. China.
We all hope that the trade tensions will vanish, especially because there is an agreement that could be reached between the United States and China. This would be very helpful.
Let's welcome now Centre for Strategic and International Studies, Simon Chair in Political Economy, Senior Vice President Matthew Goodman. Matt, thanks for joining. Interesting there to see the representative from Indonesia being very positive about everything, but Indonesia has been benefiting to a certain extent. And then those from Germany and other countries expressing hope, but not that much confidence. Where is the international economy on trade right now?
Well, I think trade was the main topic of a conversation at the G20 meeting, and there were concerns around the table, I think, about the potential downside risk that poses to global growth. There were differences over, whether that was because the U.S. was in this trade dispute with China and whether the U.S. should be trying to deal with that. And I think the U.S. apparently kept language out of the communique that would have suggested that it should be moving to solve that problem. So I don't think anybody's happy with the way trade is going. Maybe some relief over the Mexico decision, but not really comfort yet on where things are between the U.S. and China.
So the G20 is not exactly known for coming away with, a list of objectives to achieve. There's a communique. It brings together, finance chiefs and leaders, and they agree on certain directions that they hope the global economy will take. But in this case, they really have their hands tied, right? Because what the U.S. decides goes, really.
Well, I mean, the U.S. has always had sort of disproportionate weight in these bodies, and if it doesn't want something to move forward, it won't. You're right, the communiques are just words that sort of indicate direction, but they do set an agenda for what these leaders think are important issues. And so I think it was significant that they did endorse the notion that trade is important to growth, that growth is, continuing but lower than desirable, that they're going to use whatever tools are necessary, fiscal, monetary policy, structural reform, to try to get growth going again. And there were some other interesting things in the areas of principles for quality infrastructure investment, for debt sustainability, some things on global health and aging, some other interesting things that indicated where these leaders, these ministers want the global economy to go.
Are there any interesting meetings on the sidelines that we can find out about or that might have taken place in terms of talking about leverage versus the President of the United States and the United States itself? Would any of the countries have come together and sort of cooperated?
I think there's certainly sideline conversations where people express their concerns and talk about how they might work together to try to advance some of the common policy interests. But to be honest, on this one, I don't think there's any particular caucus or group that is going to be able to push the U.S. or China in one particular direction or another. I think it's going to be up to the U.S. and China, Washington and Beijing, ultimately to figure out how to move forward, whether to move forward towards some sort of trade deal. But the sideline conversations are important to get a sort of broader understanding of where people are.
Now, there were some other conversations as well, one on international tax cooperation. Matt, explain to us what that might mean.
Well, the G20 for several years has taken up this issue of greater cooperation among countries, all of whom have an interest in, first of all, cracking down on tax evasion, the more difficult issue of tax avoidance by multinational companies that are, in their view, eroding the tax base is a more challenging issue, but they have this process known as BEPS, which is the base erosion and profit sharing initiative. And they decided to move forward with that, to implement it, but not a lot of specificity on any of that. So I think it remains to be seen how that work is going to be carried forward.